and then Dr. Young will monitor the time and make the speaker aware of when time is getting close to being up. So I'm just going to call on your name, and if you would come, and just remind you to stay close to the mic. So this is a recorded meeting, so we can all hear. Our first guest is Chris Daughtery, and you can come on up.
Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Wish I was here under a better occasion. Not sure who's all familiar with the incident that happened at Man Middle School, but I was called to advocate for a parent who experienced, in layman's terms, a teacher who used a racial slur in the classroom. There's been a lot of back and forth of how it was used or whatever the case may be, but it was very evident that regardless of how it was used, it was inappropriate. Shouldn't have been done that way in any way. But much to my surprise, after that, in the midst of advocating for someone else, I had to put on a different hat, because then I had to realize that my son was in that classroom. So as I sit there asking myself, how would I respond as a student in the classroom to hear my teacher, as we honored many different educators here today, and I want to make that very clear, they're due of their honor. It's a very prestigious position to be an educator, to be responsible for the upbringing, assisting in the education of a student. But to know that that teacher didn't have the resolve to know to not use that particular word to a student of color, it's painful. And when I asked my son why he didn't tell me about it, there was different levels of mismanagement for this situation, because it happened a week prior to me finding out. And we were able to have a meeting with the principal at the school. And I do want to pay homage to that gentleman, because he took ownership to say that everything wasn't handled in the way it should be handled. None of the parents were notified other than the student in question. The children didn't have the opportunity to be made the focus. And that pains me, because I take pride of being a part of AISD. Even currently, I'm a temporary employee. I have the opportunity to go and advocate for young men, young ladies as well, working towards teaching them things like emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, communication skills, critical thinking. Those are the things that I focus on sharing with my kids. And I take that very, very personal, because we always talk about how important our children are. I've been working with kids since I was a kid, since Kyle Park. Got to be a volunteer in the summer program. Then going on to being a part of rec centers, detention centers, right here at AISD, even out of state, opportunities to work with youth. But one thing I want to be very, very clear on: it's a painful experience when people don't show up for you. And the word advocacy holds a lot of different meanings to it. And the reason I showed up to that school, it wasn't just for my child, but for every other child that I work with, because I have to answer to them. It may not be seen as a place of authority, but I don't want to be responsible for situations happening and I'm not speaking up. And I'm guilty of that, because as much of attention that this situation has brought, this individual situation, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how we failed our students of color in AISD. And I don't just say that as a parent. I say that while I was walking through those walls as a student. I say that as walking through the walls as an instructional aide on that very campus. While I try to go and advocate not only for the students, but for parents as well as the educators. And I start posing questions to myself. How many of these parents, students, educators really had the opportunity to be advocated for? And I pose a question to the board. If you had a firefighter who simply sat next to a fire and said, I don't believe fires are good. I didn't put any accelerant on this. I didn't start it. I didn't make it worse. What would you say to that firefighter? At best, you would say that they're negligent. So I say that to say no longer can we sit in a neutral position on things like racism. So I'm asking for your support in making sure that this situation is no longer a neutral seat, but something that we have the courage and integrity to say, if we're going to support our students,
Chris, your time's up. Sorry.
that's going to include the black students as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Pastor James Moore.
I'd like to say thank you for taking this opportunity to speak before the board today. When I became aware of the situation, as a minister in Abilene, I was raised and went to Abilene High, Lincoln, Woodson. Went to school at Texas Tech and came back home. It saddens me that we still have this problem that we've been dealing with for years. It saddens me that we still at this point that we cannot come together as educators to take care of our young people, to teach them the way that they should be and bring them up in a positive atmosphere. We see this as a negative atmosphere to where kids are feeling ashamed or hurt or being punished because some of them stands up for what they believe in and what we try to teach them. It saddens me to see that we still at this point, it's 2023. And we still addressing the same issues over and over again. It saddens me to say that I was born and raised here. And we still at this point that we are still trying to teach our young black men and young black women how to be responsible. But when the educators are not being responsible and accountable, held to a different standard. And I say that to say this. If it was on the other foot, how would the board react? How would they do if there was a black teacher? It's sad to say, but we are living in a different time. We should be coming together in unity and love and standing on one accord, because the Bible tells us to train up a child in the way it should go. How can you train up a child in a negative atmosphere? How can they get the teaching and the education that they need to build self-esteem when we still bringing negativity? It's sad to say. I'm Abilenian, but it don't sit right with me. When can we come together and agree and do something about it instead of sweeping it under the rug? This ain't the only incident that happened. I know other incidents that has happened to our young black kids that have been punished because some of them speak up. But we have to change the environment that we are trying to transform in our society. What kind of pride do we have in our educational system? What kind of pride do we have as being human beings? What kind of pride do you have put before you? If that was your child, how would you feel? How would you feel? And we call ourselves Christians. Abilene have churches on about every corner. And we call ourselves Christians. But we stand and let this kind of thing continue to go on. How much longer? How much more can the black community take? How much more can we stand for injustice? Is it just justice or just us? Let us be better than what we stand for. United we stand. Divided we fall. Are we going to come together in unity, or are we going to stay divided? Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Next up, Kelly. Can I use Reverend? That's what I always go.
I don't have a church. I don't like
Kelvin,
people to call me
Kelvin.
Reverend unless I'm in a church, and in the church they call me Pastor. So, all right, thank you. That's it. I'll take that too. Thank you for allowing us to speak in the public comments portion, and I want to reiterate what Mr. Chris Daugherty said. Thank you, brother, for being courageous enough to stand in your space. We have to stand for our children. They can't stand for themselves. And thank you, Pastor Moore, for speaking a word of truth and honesty on this situation. I'm a part of that group that met with Mr. Drake about 2 weeks ago, once we became aware of the alleged incident in the classroom. That was a Friday morning. He spoke very clearly and frankly about the way he understood the scenario and how it had gone and what he felt was appropriate to do. I commend him for that. He did not shun or shirk. He said, this is what happened. This is what I did. This is how I responded. This is where we are at that point. So at that point, to me, it appeared that he did not have protocol, that he was trying to figure out something in real time that was traumatic, and how do I respond appropriately in this scenario? So at that point, as I listened to him talk to the parent and talk to those advocates who were in the space, I said he did what he could, so in some way I felt he was failed. If you have an administrator who is employed as the most responsible person on the campus, and there is an incident, and he feels inequipped to respond outside of anything but what his mind says, he was failed. I want to be clear on that. And so as a result of our presence with him on that particular day, I know he communicated with the administration because there were some things that were said in the meeting that we proposed that are now adopted. And the very simple thing is that there must be a protocol when an incident happens, that a person is pulled from the learning space until the investigation is complete. We appreciate that. That's one thing. But as was previously noted, there were many things that were not done. And that's why I'm standing here. I'm standing here because I think it's imperative for a school system to create adequate learning space for all students to be successful. This is a seminal statement that must be discussed and discerned not only between you all as administrators and the board and those who are on the campuses, but I think people in the community need to be a part of that conversation. Because it's one thing for us to create policies and protocols in classrooms for people who don't have children in the system and don't understand what's actually going on in the space. That's not you all's responsibility. It's happening in Austin right now. It's happening in Austin. It's unfair. It doesn't mean that we have to play things as normal because we are Abilene Independent School District. we have a responsibility to our constituencies and taxpayers. So out of this incident, the very veracity of the incident and the responsibility and determination of the district and the administration is in flux. Because we felt that it wasn't so much as a sweeping under the rug, but a dismissal of the offense. How about that? That there was somehow that whether it was direct or indirect or was intended or unintended, it doesn't matter. It was said, and you don't realize the trauma that does to students of color. That's why his son didn't speak. That's why we said in that meeting with Mr. Drake, those kids probably said, I don't want that smoke. Because I got to come here every day and deal with somebody behind the desk who has authority to change my quality of life like that. So they suffer in silence. You don't know that feeling. So as we go through the process, what is evident from this experience, the child was insulted, other children were insulted, the children who responded were insecure, and as a result, their parents have to speak for them. So my response and concerns relate to the administration. That's my frustration. To ensure adequate and safe learning space for all students. And that begins with creating obtainable goals, not ideas, adequate and consistent interactions with your educators, and more importantly, is resources for students to achieve. We need to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. I just have a last name, McCreary.
Yes, I'm going to pass it this time. I think enough has been said here.
Okay, you sure?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And then Tanel Blackman.
I'm here as, I'm a teacher. I've worked here for the district for 14 years. When I heard of this incident, just to know that this is not an isolated incident. This is not an isolated incident. At the beginning of the school year, us as teachers, educators, if we have to if we're required to go online and do awareness for suicide, if we are required to address child neglect, if we are required to address sexual harassment in the workplace, to the point where you have videos playing of different scenarios, and if you're ever in that scenario, what your response should be. If we are required to take training on trafficking, if we are required to take training on if we have an active shooter and what our response is. We have not even had an active shooter here in Abilene in one of our schools. But just because we are aware of what's going on in our country, we have protocols in place for even if it does happen, that we are prepared and know what to do in those type of situations. So if there's a whole 3-hour training on all these scenarios, incidents that have not even occurred here, but just being proactive. Even to the point on one of the trainings, if one of your coworkers is transgender, how you are to address them, and if you don't address them properly, the consequences of that. If a child shows signs of suicide and you don't report it, if you don't say anything, how you as the educator are responsible, how administration is responsible, liable, district responsible, liable. If all these things are addressed, where are the things that address this issue? Dr. Young, I had the opportunity to accompany you and Ms. Wiley a couple years ago to Ron Clark Academy, where we sat together, we ate together, we fellowshiped together. We got to be inspired there, to get some good training down there, to walk around that campus and to see the vibrant life, culture, the possibility of what could be here in Abilene, to have a visual, tangible goal to say they've done this great thing in this district, on this campus, to see black men walking around campus with ties on, suits on, walking with pride, and young black men, boys being able to have an example of something that they aspire to be, being poured into. Again, me as an educator, there are some great things that are happening on campuses, some great things that we can be proud of. But just like anything else, when we take benchmarks and we see that we have scored low in an area, what do? We sit down with the data. We have a roundtable discussion. We collaborate to say, hey, how can we address this situation? How can we improve in this situation? How much more on this particular topic do we need to address this? We need to address this. Again, this is not an isolated situation. It's not an isolated situation. Thank you for your time.